Hi, and welcome to Digital Savvy Parenting, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Today's webinar is the first of a four-part series on teenagers and technology, sponsored by Your Teen magazine. I'm Eva Basilian, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. All of you at home, notice on the right of your screen that there's a chat box. You can submit your questions in the chat box. We'll have 30 minutes of presentation and then questions. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. For those questions that we do not get to, we will send you a response afterwards in a follow-up email. If you experience technical difficulties, don't fret. In 3 days, you will receive an email with the link to the entire recording of this webinar. And now I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. With us today are Dr. Lisa Damour.
Hello.
Hi, and Jennifer Lehner.
Hello.
Lisa is director of Laurel School Center for Research on Girls and is also on the faculty at Case Western Reserve University. She is a researcher, author, and she speaks nationally on parenting issues and maintains a private psychotherapy practice. Jennifer is a social media strategist. She is president of the Posner-Lehner Group, where she provides clients with marketing expertise using the latest technological tools. She is also a social entrepreneur whose grassroots programs have garnered national attention. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Ema.
So let me begin with this. When talking to my parent friends, I find that there is a lot of angst around technology and their children. In fact, it's probably the issue that, the number one issue that parents worry most about today. Here are some of the concerns that I hear most often. I've written them down. I'm going to read you my list. Parents are worried that their kids are rotting their brains on these devices and that they are avoiding real human contact. They worry that their child will post something on the internet that will ruin his or her reputation. They worry that their children are more vulnerable to bullying and sexual imagery, that their children will be prone to violence if they keep playing those violent video games. And at the back of our minds, I'm a parent too, we worry about worst case scenarios involving predators. Jen, I know you've done a lot of research on these risks. How concerned should we be?
Well, Eva, I totally get it. I'm a mom to a 5-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, so I'm not immune to the worries. But I think I might have a bit of a different perspective when it comes to social media and technology, in that I think that we are living in a sort of boogeyman culture right now. I think we've been living in it for a while. And we've been led to believe that if we're not monitoring our kids like every second of the day or every second of their online time, that, you know, there's some 50-year-old man hiding behind a My Little Pony avatar waiting to, you know, abduct our children. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is, you know, there's fear, and understandably so. We're worried about our kids' safety. But I think, you know, it's not surprising that we're afraid because there's all this hype. And I think the hype doesn't match the reality of the situation. And the media hypes this stuff because fear sells. And in fact, a lot of these articles, if you really dig deep, some of the more, you know, sensational articles, you'll see that they're actually written by companies who sell online security software. So that's just something to pay attention to. So boogeyman culture, you can also call it a moral panic. So moral panic is also heard it referred to as a techno panic, and this is documented all the way back to at least Socrates. So Socrates and his gang were really worried that if they wrote stuff down, that people would lose the ability to communicate. The printing press was a huge big deal. It wasn't met with like all this enthusiasm. People were scared to death of the printing press. Novels, there was just an article in the New York Times about how novels were thought to corrupt young women, that they would be addictive. Maybe they are, I don't know. But what else? The comic books. There were Senate hearings for comic books. Elvis and his pelvis, and rock and roll in general. And then not too long ago, there was Dungeons and Dragons, and there was a whole bunch of hysteria about, people were pretty convinced that this imagination game would turn kids into murderers. So this is really nothing new. And that's just the way we react when there's new technologies, new ideas. Humans feel fear, and we react with fear. So here we are in this moral panic, and we're running around trying to figure out the best software, the best tools to protect our kids and monitor our kids. And our kids get older, and tonight we're talking about teens specifically. I wouldn't say everything I'm saying tonight doesn't necessarily apply to, and I'm sure you too, Lisa, for 4, 5, 6 years old, 6-year-olds. We're talking about teens tonight. So our teens, guess what? Suddenly we see we don't have so much control. I mean, online or offline. And meanwhile, with all these softwares and monitoring devices that we're trying to find, and all the activity we're trying to monitor, we learn that it's completely unsustainable because the stuff changes every single day, and the stuff that they're participating in changes every day. One day it's Snapchat, the next day might be Instagram. So it's just impossible. So on that note, I think that our best online safety tool we have is the strength of our relationship with our kids, which sounds so cliche, but I really, really believe that. And I think the best way to cultivate that relationship is not so much by monitoring and helicoptering, but by really participating and engaging with them in a meaningful way. And I want to make sure I get to all my talking points here. Oh, yeah. The truth is there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of fun things we can do with our kids, and a lot of good things can come of it, but we need to show them where the good stuff is, and then they'll have less time for the bad stuff, essentially. And then the other thing, to your point, I want to touch quickly on what you said about ruining, what if they ruin their reputations, making mistakes so big that they can't bounce back from. It's true. When we put stuff out there online, it does last forever. It doesn't disappear. But there's something huge that none of us are talking about, and I think if we zoom out, we need to look at this, and that is, there has never been a time in human history when we have been more empowered to tell the story about ourselves that we want to tell in the manner that we want to tell it and to whom we want to tell it to. So I think that's something worth looking at, and we're not going to show it now, but on the website, which might be at the top of your screen, posnerlehnergroup.com/teen, I've put a list of resources, and there's a little video there that says dearlisarudgers.com, and it's basically a multimedia presentation that a young lady did to try to get a job. So I encourage you to look at that.
Thank you. I have to say that this is a perspective that you do not often hear, and I personally find it reassuring. It's just not what you tend to hear when you talk about technology and children. However, Lisa, I have a question for you. Since we wouldn't give our kid a car without showing them how to drive it, or we wouldn't give our kid a recipe and say, here, go cook in the kitchen without showing them basic kitchen safety, what advice do you have for parents about teaching kids responsibility around technology?
What I have come to feel about this is that it's easier for us to talk with our kids about the things we're trying to protect. Not just saying no to technology for the sake of technology, but I think it's really helpful when families sit down and think, what are our priorities? What are the priorities we want to protect? And to throw out a few things, you might talk about sleep. You might talk about protecting social skills and their development. You might talk about protecting a child's security. So those are 3 S's. You could add on a 4th S, something like protecting their study skills or their school performance. Not everything has to start with an S, but those are some ones that come to mind. And I think it's easier as a parent to protect things as opposed to just say no to technology for the sake of technology. So say, for example, you say protecting sleep's a priority. Then your rules flow from that. Excuse me. So your rules might be something like the phone goes in my room before you go to bed. Excuse me. You shut down the technology an hour before you sleep, things like that. Excuse me. So then often what parents ask me is, well, how much do I have to monitor? And I think that then depends on how good your teenager is at partnering with you around your priorities. So if your teenager is good about turning in their phone or, excuse me, shutting it down at the right time, you don't have to monitor so much. But if they need a lot of support around that, you're going to have to provide it.
Throat lozenge, anyone?
Yeah, exactly.
Candy?
But I think, so that's one way we want to think about it. I think that the other way we want to think about it is that monitoring, and this gets back to Jennifer's point, isn't about busting all the time. It's not about trying to stop things from happening. So it may be, and this is sort of thinking with social skills in mind, it may be that, especially with a younger teen, you might be looking at their phone and some texting activity, and you might say, you know, the way you're talking to your friend, like, I know you're being sarcastic. I'm not sure your friend knows you're being sarcastic. You know, it looks like from her response, she might not have caught that joke. And it can be a basis for a conversation. And again, it's about the relationship. It's about keeping an eye on it. But it's not necessarily about, hey, I caught you, give me the phone, it's all over. So I think it's always easier as parents if we put it in terms of what do we want to keep technology from interfering with. And then we have the energy to sort of enforce more rules. And we also have a better rationale for explaining the rules to our teenagers. That it's not about, I'm against technology, it's that I'm for you getting your schoolwork done.
Well, about these conversations, can you give us an example of what a conversation about sexting might look like? No, not look like. Sound like.
Might sound like.
I want to know what it looks like.
So I think a conversation about sexting should go something like this, which is to say, you know, here's the phone you've been asking for, you know, and this is probably one of many conversations you're going to have about this phone. And then to say things like, you know, let's go with the grandma rule, or the rabbi rule, or the local priest rule, which is if you wouldn't feel good with your grandmother seeing what you've done or written, then you shouldn't do it on your phone. And I think it's important to say that. I also think it's important to say, just because you delete it off of your phone doesn't mean it's gone. So if I hear that you've sexted, or I get evidence that you've sexted from anybody else, we're going to have a conversation. Of course, this is when my frog comes to my throat. I think the other thing you want to say to teens is you want to be careful about how you talk about their friends. That sometimes you hear stories of teens who have sexted, and it does happen, you know, much more frequently than we wish it would. And I think you want to resist saying something like, oh my gosh, if you ever did that, that would be the end of the world, that would be the worst thing, because then you're sending a very strong message that if something goes wrong, if they do something, if they get out in front of themselves, that they can't come to you and that they don't feel comfortable asking you for help. So I think you really want to talk about those things in a low-key way.
Okay. Well, I was sort of following up now on what you just said. Could you just get a little more into that topic?
Sure.
Of how can you encourage your child to come and talk to you if he or she is in trouble or sees trouble? What
Right.
if your kid's embarrassed or
Right.
scared that you'll be angry or take away his device? So you sort of mentioned that, but could you just...
Yeah, so I think, you know, the way you want to set it up, if you haven't vilified the friend, you certainly keep the door open a little bit more. But then I think if you do hear about another child doing something, instead of vilifying, you can say things like, wow, you know, it sort of sounds like they got out ahead of themselves, and, you know, what do you think got in their way of, you know, using better judgment, and what do you think they might do to sort things out, and how do you think their folks could help them? So you sort of use those conversations about other kids as a basis for talking about things. I also think it's really important when you first offer technology to a teenager to say, look, if this doesn't go well, we're going to rein it back in a little while. So if you do something with your phone you never should have done, you know, the phone might be mine for 24 hours or even 36. You know, that for a teenager is a really terrifying possibility. I think one of the things that we all sort of notice about teenagers once they get this technology is that it feels like an extension of their own bodies. And to say, you know, it doesn't actually work that way. If you use it in a way that's inappropriate, we're going to take a break from it and then come back to it, is a way to make it clear that you see this as an ongoing process, that you're not looking to ruin their social lives, to take things away forever, but you are looking to make sure that they are learning as they go, and that if things get out of hand, you're going to help them rein it back in.
Yeah, and I even liked your tone of voice because it didn't sound judgmental or punitive. It was kind of like, this makes sense.
This is how it's going to go.
It's going to make sense.
Yep.
This is, yeah.
We want to give you the freedom, and if you handle it really well, that'll be great. And if you don't handle it really well, you might need a little less freedom for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about privacy. How much privacy should you give your kids? And I'd like to hear both of your perspectives on this. Lisa, you can start.
I'm a huge believer in teens having privacy, that teens want privacy. It's normal to development. I think all the time we see, even by 11 or 12, kids start to close their doors to do the exact same things they did with their doors open. And so I am a big believer in privacy. I think that early and often you should have conversations about what's private and what's not. And by and large, what happens online, as Jennifer said, it's not private. And I think that we should be very careful about giving teens the impression that somehow it is. When we have younger teens and we give them technology, I think it's great in that early go with the relationship to make it clear that, look, if the whole wide world can see what you're doing online, I also can see what you're doing online. And to have those conversations where you pick up the phone and say, wow, what's going on here? As teenagers age, those are harder conversations to have. That, even the most well-behaved teen who's doing nothing, out of bounds online will be sort of appalled if his or her mother wants to check and see what's going on the phone. I think that, again, is a place where you say, look, I'm not going to check your phone all the time, but if I hear round the way or I have any evidence that you're using it in an inappropriate way, if other people know and I find out, we're going to have a conversation about that. At the same time, I think it's really helpful if you also say, look, I will protect your privacy and I believe in your privacy. So if you want to have friends over and you guys go in the basement, I'm not going to come down and bug you. I'm not going to listen at the door. I think sometimes teenagers are so busy these days that the only way they can get together sometimes is online. And we used to go out, places, and I know you've got thoughts along these lines. And I think we need to be respectful that they deserve and need some time together, but they need to conduct themselves in ways that they can feel good about.
Okay. Jennifer, would you like to weigh in?
I would, Eva. I would.
I bet you would.
No, I mean, and not that what I have to say is so different from what Lisa says, but I want to start I'm going to get to privacy from around the way of this notion of kids being addicted to their devices, okay? So just sort of bear with me for a second. I hear all the time, like, my kid is addicted to his device. And as long as we're going to use the word addiction, I would just say that I don't think kids are addicted to their devices so much as they're addicted to each other, as they always have been since the beginning of teenagers.
I like that. Write that down.
So this is where they congregate now. They're congregating and they hang out together online. Where were you on Saturday afternoon in 1985, typically?
You asking me?
Either of you, yes.
The Limited Express in Montgomery Mall in Bethesda.
Okay, yeah.
The equivalent in Denver.
All right,
yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So we went to the mall, or the equivalent. And are the kids going to the mall now? I mean, no, they're not going to the mall because somewhere around, we decided, like, maybe when we adopted the 24-hour news cycle, that our world was an unsafe place. Again, more panic, moral panic, but our world's an unsafe place, so our kids can't go anywhere. And the truth is, like you said, they're busy. Even if we did allow them to go to these places, when are they going to find the time? Mm-hmm. So they've created these new public spaces online, and this is where they spend time together. And when I think about that, I think about myself at the mall on a Saturday afternoon in 1980, whatever. And yeah, so I picture my mom walking up to me and tapping me on the shoulder when I'm in the circle of my friends saying, what you just said is inappropriate. And I would say, like, of course it's inappropriate. I'm a teenager and I'm trying out swear words and I'm probably putting on that frosty blue eyeshadow that was so big in the 80s that you don't want me to wear. I mean, I'm a teenager, so that's what I'm doing. So when I think about that, it helps me to have more empathy for my teenager. And I was talking about this webinar the other night with a friend, or a lady that I just met actually, and she said, I'm so glad that you all are doing this webinar, she said, because I feel like I feel so confident in my parenting of my 16-year-old daughter. She said, in all areas except for technology. She said, I remember the temptation to drink a glass of wine. at 16. I remember the temptation to kiss that boy. She's like, but I cannot for the life of me see what could possibly be entertaining to my daughter right now with making goofy faces at her Snapchat all day long and sending it back and forth to her girlfriend. And you know, we laughed, and then I gave her that mall analogy that I just shared with you, and then she just sort of, she stopped and she just said, oh my gosh, I just had this flashback. And she said, I remember being on the landline phone attached to the wall with the cord stretched as tight as it could be, so my mom couldn't hear me, watching Knots Landing for the duration of the show and not saying a word to my girlfriend. And she's like, I'm sure my mom thought I was a lunatic. And we laughed, but the point is this. It's just, you know, my parenting style is different from your parenting style. We're all different. Our parenting styles are as different as our personalities, and our children are different too, with different needs and different maturity levels. But to start, I don't think you could ever go wrong to just start with empathy and respect. And then, you know, and then go from there. I mean, it doesn't make you a sucker. It doesn't make you naive. It's just a good place to start. So that's kind of how I feel about privacy.
That's great. The privacy issue is a big one for parents, and I appreciate, or I'm sure we all appreciate, having your both perspectives on this. I like the idea that it's the new public, that the online world is the new public. It's such a good way for us to relate, because so much of this is unrelatable for us.
True.
Yep.
All right, switching gears. Jen, you suggested this idea of using technology as a way to connect with your kids. Now, for me, this is a paradigm shift, really, in how we view technology and our kids, because typically we are talking about how to contain the technology, you know, talked about that, and but you're telling us that we should be encouraging our children to embrace this technology as a way of improving our relationship. So can you give us some ideas of how we can partner with our teens around technology?
Yes. So really, you're only limited by your own imagination, but just to get you started, I mean, just some really obvious things, right? So, wow, those are cool pictures you took with your Instagram account. How did you do that? Filters? What are these filters? Show me some of these filters. Help me open up an Instagram account. What's a hashtag? I think I'm going to open up a YouTube account. Who should I follow? What are some of your favorite videos? So, you know, it's meaningful engagement. It's not just policing. It's like really real engagement. I think that we need to ask them to teach us stuff, and what they don't teach us, we need to teach ourselves. It's just time. You know, I think we're all guilty of throwing up our hands and saying, oh, my fifth grader knows more about technology than I do, but it's just not cute anymore, and actually it's just kind of a cop-out because, you know, those days are over. Like, we have to get in there, but this is a way of getting in there in a way that is meaningful. Let's see. All right, so specifics. There's a really cool thing called geocaching. I put it on the website. This is, just check it out, geocaching.com. It brings the outdoors together with your GPS technology, and it's like a real-life treasure hunt. It's really incredible. And then finally, I got to say this. We are running out of time, but media literacy, huge. I'm huge for media literacy. And what I mean by that is that for example, does your kid know how to recognize phishing with a PH? Does your child know how to write a really secure password? Do they know what spam looks like? And do they know how to write a really good Google query? So, and the reason that's important, which sounds so like not relevant, but the reason that's important is there's other shocking things that your kid can stumble upon besides pornography online. For example, there was a woman talking the other day. Her kid heard that chimpanzees attack people. Her child was very shocked by this, came home and typed in chimpanzee attack in the Google search bar. Up pops these gruesome photographs of people who have been attacked by chimpanzees. If this person, the mother and the child, knew how to write a proper search query, that would have never happened. Not only that, if you know how to write a quality query, your children are going to get quality results and reliable information, and this is going to be a way to basically just benefit them in their education and just lifelong learning, because this is the way we're learning. Yeah. So, and there's a million other ideas. You can find them on the website.
Thank you.
I also think I would add on that, even the best laid plans sometimes go awry. And I think it's to say to teenagers, especially when they're younger, but even as they get older, you know, if you're ever online and you come across something or somebody sends you something that shocks you, scares you, weirds you out, or leaves you with a lot of questions, I hope you will feel free to come talk with me about that. You know, you're not going to be in trouble. I want to answer any questions you have. That's a conversation we can have. You don't have to feel ashamed or embarrassed if something goes wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of things not going as planned, you know, we've talked a lot about the strategies and approaches that we can use to manage our technology situation, but we are dealing with the teen years. So it is possible that things will not go as planned, and that our children it's likely that our children will push back, and they may not listen to us. So what happens then?
Well, you know, so I think, you know, if everything's going right, you're pulling back and trying to keep things from getting out of hand, and your teenager's job is to try to push and see how much freedom and autonomy they can get. And this will happen around technology and around things not related to technology. I think it's important to put speed bumps in place. Things like, I'm checking your phone, or if I hear that you're using your phone in an inappropriate way, we're going to have to take a break from the phone. And I think it's important to make sure that you're talking about technology and kids who make mistakes on technology in a way that keep the lines of communication open. I think that's really key. But I also think that, as with all parenting of adolescents, it's sort of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. You know, you give them some freedom, you cut them some slack, they take it a little bit too far, you find out one way or another, or maybe they start to feel uncomfortable about what's happened and they back things up a little bit. But I think that the key in this is that it's not a single conversation. You know, it's sort of like the sex talk. You know, there's no one sex talk. You know, you talk about sex with your kids in various ways that it comes up in the course of parenting them. And so it's the same with technology. There's not one conversation where you say, here are the rules, here's how it's going to be, these are our expectations, and then you're done. And also, if you have the one conversation and it doesn't go well, that's not a time to give up and say, well, we tried to have the conversation and the rules didn't work. That I think that the key on this, and I've got a slide along these lines, is you want to keep the lines of communication open all the time about technology, and you're going to do this by, you know, doing several things. You're going to be back and forth with your children about it. You're going to not vilify other kids, and you're going to expect this is sort of an ongoing conversation that you're having all the time with your teenagers. And this is parenting today, you know, and I think that that's the thing that's really hard for people to accept. That we want parenting to be the parenting that we remember being done for us. And I think it's very hard that we're asked to parent through an aspect of development that we were never parented through ourselves. But I worry about parents who say, you know, she's a great kid, I know what she's doing all the time when we're together, you know, online, I'm not going to worry about that. And I think, gosh, you know, that's not really where we're at anymore. And that parenting now encompasses all of it. Even if you can't access every single thing your teenager is doing online, and you don't need to, and it's probably not, you know, it's not realistic or necessary, but parenting does involve ongoing conversations about what they're doing in their offline lives and also what's happening in their online lives. And it's hard.
Sometimes
it's hard.
It's easier to be lazy.
Yes. No, this is hard, and this is harder than it's ever been. And yet, it's the same exact conflicts they're struggling with in their offline lives, but it's happening in a more private way.
Well, one more question as a follow-up. What if it's not just, this is for Jen, what if it's not just the normal teen pushback that you're seeing? What if your kid is on his device all the time, he's in his room, he doesn't have friends? What if your kid is being bullied and she can't sleep, she looks depressed? What if, or like your child is sending sexually inappropriate pictures over the internet? What if that's your kid, Jen?
Well, there's 2 things I want to say about that real quick. One is, because we're running out of time.
This is our last question.
Yeah.
We're good.
So one is that research shows that the kids who are most at risk online are the same kids who are at risk offline. If we try to put a Band-Aid over this by just sticking some spyware on a computer, or, you know, trying to, you know, make our kids be, you know, digitally celibate, or just taking away their devices and thinking that's going to solve these kind of bigger problems, you know, we're deluding ourselves and really doing them a disservice. I mean, they need help from people like Lisa Damour, or, you know, just at the very least, just some real hands-on, you know, parenting, not just monitoring and taking away devices. The other thing I want to say that's very interesting about this is that suddenly in this new world, those kids are more visible to us, right? They're louder. So if they're doing that stuff, we're able to see it in a way we couldn't see it before. And so it's up to us to pay attention. And that's another reason why we all have to be media literate, and we can't just say, oh, you know, my kid's smarter than I am. No, it's just, it's not acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for that. I think we're ready to take some questions from our audience. Let's see. Can I have some questions? Okay, yeah, all right, I think there. Okay, these are the ones, okay. All right, Lisa, how do I help my teen deal with the stress of knowing in real time that she was not invited to the party?
That's a tough one, right? Because back in the olden days, maybe the party happened and you found out 3 days later, you know, and that there was some intervening time and you had a good time in the meantime. But now, you know, teens can know what they're missing out on because they're watching themselves miss out on things. I think that's enormously painful for a teenager. You know, I think that for teenagers, being left out of the party feels often like the end of the world. And in their way, it is like the end of the world. Their social lives are so important to them. I think that the most important thing a parent can do in these moments is to try to help the teenager maintain some perspective. That they can say things like, you know, this happened to me, it's really, really painful, you're going to be okay. That usually will not be greeted with a, oh, I'm so glad you said that, that's so fantastically helpful, thank you. But I think it's helpful to do that. I think the most important thing is that the parent needs to not become as upset as the teenager is. That sometimes when your teenager's really upset, the parent becomes really upset, and what happens is it actually seems to affirm for the teenager that it is just that bad, and then things can feel even more out of control. You know, it's bad enough if the teenagers are upset, but if the parents feel that it's as severe as the teenagers do, that's actually pretty frightening for some teenagers. So I think that what you want to do as a parent in that moment is to be really empathic and validating. To say, you know, I'm really sorry that happened, and it feels really crummy to know that they're all out and you're here, stuck with us, you know, in the house. You know, but I think you're going to be okay. You know, and something like that that is calm and kind and reassuring, but that does not ramp up or meet the teenager at the level of distress they're feeling. And I actually think the parent should not expect the teenager to come down, you know, in their upset immediately. And the teenagers are often even annoyed with parents when they don't sort of join them in the level of distress the teenager feels. That doesn't mean this isn't working. I think that in some ways sometimes getting annoyed with your mom for not getting upset enough about it is actually a good next step past being mad that you got left out of the party. So I think the most important thing here is that the parent maintain perspective and then model perspective for the teenager, even if the teenager in that moment can't calm right down.
Yeah, that's a question a lot of my friends have. That's a big one. Thank you. Another question, and this one is for Jen. Some of my friends have technology contracts with their kids. Can you tell me what these are, and is it too late to write one up if I've never done this before?
Oh, well, as a matter of fact, Eva, I do know about some contracts.
I don't. I'd love to hear.
No, but I want to point this out. There's this downloadable PDF on the link that I think is at the top of your screen, and there's a link to, I think, the best device contracts that I've seen to date. And I just like the language in them. They're practical. They're not ridiculous. Because some of these are like, come on, people. They're
like
just
prenuptial agreements.
No, right. I mean, they make sense. So I like them. So you'll see. And there's one for just about every device you could think of. And then, is it too late? No, of course it's not too late. Because here's the deal: if our kids need to understand that this is, like Lisa said, an ongoing conversation, because if for no other reason, technology is changing every single day. So if you want a contract now, but you didn't do it when you first gave your child the phone, so what? You're still paying the data, you know, for the data plan. So I say you can make all the rules that you want to. I mean, it's up to you. So I think, you know, we know our children, so they expect us. I mean, they're reasonable people, most of them, right?
Yeah. Cool. That's great. Thank you. Do we have time for any more audience questions? One more. Okay. I think this is for Lisa. We have not yet gotten our 13-year-old a smartphone. He says, number one, but everyone has one. Everyone else has one. And number two, he needs a smartphone to know what everyone is doing. So is this true? Should we listen to him?
By 13, it's probably not far from the truth. And I have worked with several families over the years who were really holding off on giving their kids a phone for all sorts of great reasons, and that they finally let go of that and got their kid a phone because it was the only way for their child to be involved in the social life that was going on around them. And they really felt that it was more important for their child to be able to have friends and stay connected to the kids at school than it was for them to maintain this policy of not having a phone. I think that moment, though, when a 13-year-old really, really, really wants a phone is the moment to get out the contract. Because that's when you have the most leverage. And you can say, we hear you, you really want this, we've got some terms that we all need to agree to. And I think the chances of them being willing to agree to some front-end terms when their wishes are that strong are pretty good. But again, living document, changing and growing with the technology use over time.
Ooh, I like that living document.
Yeah,
This is a living
this
document.
is a living document. And so I think that that's how you start that conversation. Here's another question. Great.
Oh, what happens when your kid blocks you? Jen, how can you undo that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the age of the child, number one. And I think that, you know, why are they blocking me? I mean, the thing, I think if you back up a minute and if you're not taking a policing stance and, you know, I mean, honestly, I would block my mom too if I can't have a conversation. You know, it would feel very awkward. But if the child is 9, my answer would be different than if the child is 13. I would say to the child who is 9 what Lisa said, which I thought was so good, that, you know, if the whole world can see it, then I can see it too. You know, but that's at 9. I mean, more so than at 13. So I don't know. I mean, I would have a conversation and ask, why are you blocking me? Is it because you think that I'm policing you? Is it because you think that you'll get in trouble for something you say? Is it because you're doing something I wouldn't approve of? I mean, it's an opportunity for a conversation, and then maybe a chance for you to sort of say, maybe it's a situation where the parent isn't involved at all. And so on a parallel, is it parallel or perpendicular? Parallel track, you start engaging, becoming media literate, show them that you can be a good digital citizen yourself, and maybe they'll let you into their world. I mean, I'm not a child psychologist, but I mean,
I am.
well,
That's convenient. So here's something interesting. Here's a rationale I've seen a 13-year-old give for blocking their parent that was actually really smart. And she said, my friends and I are talking about who has crushes on who, and it's really weird then when we all come over to the house and you know this dynamic. And so the solution that family came up with, which I thought was really smart, is that the uncle, the out-of-town uncle, wasn't blocked. And so he would sort of keep an eye on what was going on because the girl didn't care if he knew, you know, who was having crushes on who. So I've seen families recruit an older sibling, right, or a cousin, some cool cousin who's 17 or 18, who is actually the one.
The uncle thing.
Yeah,
so much.
Depends on the uncle. It depends on the uncle. But, you know, somebody who is willing to kind of keep an eye on that, whatever app the child is using in that moment, and that to serve as a speed bump again for the teenager who wants to block the parent, and that is a solution I've seen some families effect, and with the understanding that if the uncle or the cousin or whatever sees something untoward, that then the parent's going to hear about it. But I actually thought that was a really great reason for a kid to want to block their parent.
yeah.
Great. Thank you. That was a great question. We have a few minutes left, and as I said at the beginning of today's webinar, that this one is the first in a series. On October 11th, am I right? Or we don't know. We'll announce the date. Nigam will be leading our next webinar. Damour is the founder of SSP Blue, the leading advisory firm for online safety, security, and privacy challenges facing corporations and governments. Damour is with us right now to give us a quick preview of what is to come. Damour, welcome. Is he there? Okay. All right. Damour will be here in a second.
Is he coming all the way from California? It takes a while.
Okay.
It takes a while.
All right. He's coming. Can you hear us? Damour, can you hear us? No. Okay. Okay.
Can I just take this opportunity real quick
Yeah.
while we're waiting on Damour to say that this is the best book. Every parent needs to read it. It's by a woman named Dana Boyd. There's 10 years of research in here. All about, it's complicated, the social lives of network teens. So I recommend that you buy it because you're going to want to mark it up the way that I did. But she was kind enough to offer a free digital download of the whole book, and it's on the link that's at the top of your screen. Do we have Damour?
Okay. Well, you know what?
I think he's in the little box down there.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you know, just wrapping this up. Oh,
We saw your chair.
we can hear you. Hi, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine.
Great.
Hopefully you're hearing me. So what I'm going to talk about is something you all just actually talked about a second ago, which is, are you a lean forward parent? Are you a throw your hands up in the air and lean back parent? I think somebody actually called that kind of a parent a cop-out. So what we're going to do is talk about how all of us, those watching, those in the studio, those around the country, can actually be lean forward parents in the digital age. But then the real question is going to be, what kind of parent do you want to be in the digital age, even if you're leaning forward? Are you going to spy on your kids? Are you going to let them be and say, you know what, learn the hard way, we all did it growing up, you'll figure it out? Or somewhere in between. And how do you decide in the digital world what kind of parent do you want to be? And that's what we're going to cover in the next webinar.
Lisa and Jen, what would you like to leave our audience with here today before we go? Lisa, you can. Sure. Yeah.
You know, I think for me the take home is this is an ongoing conversation. You know, and that the terms of this are going to be renegotiated all the time. And I think you cannot make blanket rules that apply to every child. I think a lot depends on the teenager and how impulsive they are and the kind of decisions they make. I know that there are families who have different rules for different kids in the same house. And so I would set your priorities, decide what really matters to you as a family, organize your rules around what matters to you as a family, use that as a rationale for why you have the rules, and then see how much of a partner your teenager can be with you in protecting those priorities and taking care of those things, and how much you're going to have to monitor and how strict your rules are going to depend very heavily on how much your teen can partner with you around the priorities that you've set. Right. But this is a roll up your sleeves, stay in it, ongoing situation in terms of the kind of parenting we want to do around technology.
Okay, thank you. Jen, any final words?
Yes, I would say number one, our greatest online safety tool is the strength of our relationship with our kids. And I would say get media literate, people. It's so easy. If your kids aren't going to teach you and that's not feasible, there's literally nothing you can, I mean, you can ask YouTube or Google to teach you just about anything. How do I open up an Instagram account? Anything you want, there'll be a video to teach you how to do it. And third, we didn't talk about this at all, but I meant to, and that is we do need to be talking about etiquette. So I think we do have a lot of bad manners happening right now. So that really is a concern to me, and I know to all of my parent friends that we cannot stand, you know, this with the phone in the restaurant, in public places, when we're in conversation. Last night I was rehearsing my talking points with my 13-year-old son, and he whipped out his phone, and he's like reading his phone. And I'm like, this is ironic, but not in a good way. I mean, I'm going to a parenting digital thing. Don't do that. So, but I do, culture is slow to catch up with technology. It always has been, and we will get there. But we all do need to be deciding what the rules of etiquette are in our home and in our communities And eventually, I think it'll be so taboo. I don't think texting in restaurants will be an okay thing. Yeah, I totally believe that.
Need a new Miss Manners.
Well, they'll probably add that, I'm sure.
The old one just does not apply anymore. Well, thank you both so much. You guys were amazing. There was just so much information in this short period of time, and it was fabulous. And your perspectives were different and complementary, and I think we all learned so much. So thank you so much for being here.
It was fun to be here.
I just want to end with, we'd like to thank Verizon for presenting the Your Teen Technology Series. We are grateful to them for their commitment to educating parents and teens and their commitment to safeguarding our families. Thank you and good night.
Do you wish your son was studying rather than playing on his phone? Answer, My Verizon. You're in control with Verizon Family Base. You can set limits on purchases, usage time, and even lock down their device on demand. That's powerful. Sign in or register at vzw.com/myverizon.